Thank you so much. Here, actually, I'll do this. Ooh, that feels good. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our virtual attendees for joining us as well. A quick note to our virtual attendees, there is a Q&A section on your Zoom webcast menu, so please enter in any questions or comments you'd like to share there, and we will read them out loud when we move on to Q&A. And that goes for everyone in the audience as well. Be thinking about questions or things you'd like to share, or observations you also have, and we'll kick off a discussion towards the end of the panelists' talks. And afterwards, we will continue to have our reception so that we can continue the conversation and to chat with each other and get to know all of each other better. And I'm always excited when I'm in a room full of women who are passionate about the arts, who are passionate about democracy, who are passionate about women's rights. And so I'm very, very thrilled. We have just an outstanding panel tonight. We have Marcy Silman, who's a longtime cultural journalist in Seattle and in the Pacific Northwest. We have Ellen Walker here from the ballet, the Pacific Northwest Ballet. We have Amada Cruz down the other end, who's the director and CEO of SAM, the Seattle Art Museum. And we have Michelle Witt right in the middle. Michelle is the co-founder, is the executive and artistic director for the Meany Center of Performing Arts at UW. And Kristen Lee, who is the co-founder and artistic director of Emerald City Music here in the Pacific Northwest. And they are going to share their thoughts on the arts, how it survived during our pandemic, the importance of arts and democracy, and their experience as women leaders in arts institutions and in the art world in general. And I, in fact, until we started researching this event, didn't realize that almost all of the great art institutions in Seattle are run by women, which is fantastic. And I'm very excited about that. So I'm thrilled to welcome you all. Thank you for lending us your time and your lived experiences and your expertise. And I hope everyone enjoys this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Frances. I'll give more directions about how to ask questions. Because this is on Zoom as well as live, we'll need you who are here to ask the questions into the microphone so that the people who are not here can actually hear them, but that's coming up later. Frances sort of briefly spewed off all your names in alphabetical order. I'm going to reintroduce you and ask you each to briefly just tell us what your organization does for people who might not be familiar. So Amada Cruz, her official title is Director and CEO of Seattle Art Museum. For people who don't know about the Art Museum, what's your elevator pitch?
So first of all, thank you so much for all of you on Zoom and also in the theater. It's really great to be in person again and to be talking about the arts and hopefully advocating for the arts. So really appreciate Marcy's been doing this for a long time, I know. So yes, the Seattle Art Museum is the biggest art museum in the Pacific Northwest. We have 3 venues with 3 very different experiences for folks. We have our headquarters downtown, SAM, which is very urban experience in a tower, and we have various art collections from different eras and different time periods. So we're very much an encyclopedic museum. We also have the glorious Asian Art Museum in Volunteer Park. I see some heads nodding, yes. My fabulous predecessor, Kim Rorschach, did a full renovation of the Asian Art Museum. So that is a beautiful Art Deco structure, very much the traditional temple in the park that museums have had for a long time. And so that's a really wonderful, very different experience. It's actually where the museum was born in 1933. And we also have the wonderful Olympic Sculpture Park, which hopefully many of you have been to, 9-acre park in the middle of the city on the water with 20 world-class works of sculpture, which thanks to a fabulous donor is free and clean and safe. So that's who we are.
And wonderful. And on a day like this, super wonderful.
And busy.
Kristen Lee, violinist and co-founder and artistic director of Emerald City Music. I think that you may be leading the newest of the organizations that are represented. So tell us a little bit about Emerald City Music.
Yes. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be amongst a panel of such established women here. Emerald City Music is, yes, probably one of the younger organizations here. We just wrapped up our 6th season. So we started in 2015, and our sort of mission is to bring chamber music in sort of an unconventional, untraditional way. So our home is actually at 415 Westlake, which is rooted in South Lake Union. And we're the very first music organization to have any kind of presenting music in South Lake Union. Our target audience obviously is a lot of the younger tech people. And we have done our research to find out that more than 90% of the tech folks have some sort of relationship to music. So once we discovered this, and once we were trying to figure out the question that every music organization asks: how do we bring young people to music, to concerts and to classical music? This was where we decided to start our performances. So we give 6 to 7 performances every season from October to May. And our type of music that we perform is chamber music, but we're trying to sort of redefine what that means. Chamber music essentially means music that's played in chamber. So should we define that to any particular genre? Perhaps not. So we're trying to bring good music. Good music is good music. And that's sort of our motto. And we're trying to bring it into this very chamber-like intimate venue where you could actually really integrate yourself as an audience member with all the musicians. So we don't really particularly have a stage. Our very last concert, we actually gave a performance of the Goldberg Variations by Johann Sebastian Bach, but some of the audience members had the choice to bring their sleeping bags. And so they were able to lounge and listen to Bach in the way they wanted, however they wanted. So that's sort of our idea. We're trying to sort of break those ideas of what the traditional classical music experience is really about. So yeah, so thank you for having me.
That sounds amazing and wonderful. This is alphabetical again, just so you know, so I'm jumping around. Ellen Walker is Executive Director of Pacific Northwest Ballet. She's been at PNB for a while. Tell us about PNB, Ellen.
I just realized I'm going into my 20th season. I can't believe it. I took a contract at PNB in 2003 for 5 months, and I've been aging in place ever since. But thank you, Marcy. Yeah, that contract got extended, I guess. So yes, I'm with PNB, and we are. For some reason in ballet, it's not a good thing to say we're a regional ballet company, but we really are, because there aren't that many ballet companies here on the West Coast. By budget size, we're the 5th largest ballet company in the US. We actually have a very broad repertoire. We have lots of modern works on our program, in addition to classical ballet, of course. We also have a training institution. Pre-pandemic, we had 1,200 kids in our school, and that number dropped by about half during the pandemic. It is hard to do ballet on Zoom, and really a tough thing for so many kids who love to dance, love to move to music, and don't like to do that in their dining room. Mm-hmm. So we are right next door at the Phelps Center and also at McCaw Hall. And one of the things that we're very focused on is our work as a community asset and evolving this art form and this field so that it is welcoming for everyone. And we have been very intent on that in the last several years. So really consequential work that I care about deeply, and as does our artistic director, Peter Bowl. And I just have to shout out Marcy, because she keeps us relevant with the work she does as an arts journalist. So that is deeply appreciated, Marcy.
Thank you.
You know.
Michelle Witt, Executive and Artistic Director of Meany Center for the Performing Arts. It's probably fitting that you are the last of these 4 to describe your mission, because unlike each of your 3 predecessors on this panel, Meany isn't that easily synopsized. You don't have one thing that you do.
It's not synopsized easily, but I did.
But you did it anyway.
I did it, but we provide, and I think it's particularly interesting when we talk about democracy in the arts. We provide opportunities for diverse artists, community, students, and faculty connect, we say, in the discovery and exploration of the boundless power of the arts to create positive change in the world. And that's something that we're continuing to deepen our understanding around. What does it mean to create positive change in the world through the arts? But we are an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary performing arts presenter on the University of Washington's campus at Meany Hall, which is a beautiful space. If you haven't been there, we present classical music, dance, a little bit of theater. We also house and produce many of the student performances at the University of Washington, and so we present about 150 performances a year actually at Meany, but about 40 to 50 of those are performances from artists around the world in those genres, and it's a wonderful place to be able to connect students and artists and community members around a range of different projects.
And I have seen people, I don't even know, it's not Repelling Bandaloop, who are a dance company that performs aerially, both in and outside of Meany. One of the most exciting things I saw there.
Yeah, we started a season one year with these dancers on the outside of our building. We just ended our season with the dance company and theater company, really, Momix, presenting their version of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, so there's really all sorts of things. I know we're going to talk a lot about the role of art in our society. Democracy on the edge, we sometimes think lately. But before I do that, I really can't talk to 4 leaders of arts organizations without talking about the last 2 years and 2 months, the pandemic. And I'm wondering, Ellen, you mentioned before the pandemic, we had this many students. You also had a bigger budget. What exactly, I'd like each of you to answer this, but what kind of hit did you take during this pandemic?
Well, we took an 80% hit to revenue.
80?
Yeah, 80.
80.
Yeah. And, it was so, it has been the strangest time we got that one last, you were there, dress rehearsal of a program called 1000 Pieces. And it's contemporary work by Alejandro Cerruto with dancers in water on the stage. And it was there and then it was gone, and everything was gone for 18 months. And our audience was great. They converted their ticket purchases into donations and their subscriptions. And they were intent, as we were, on our survival. It has been a race to sustainability every day since March 13th of 2020. It really has. We've lost ground, I think, in many ways, in terms of just competing for a place of importance in this region. We have so many competing priorities here, and they're all important. But yes, 80% hit to earned revenue. Everything we do is predicated on proximity. It's about being in person, dancers in proximity to one another, stage crew shoulder to shoulder backstage, audience shoulder to shoulder in their seats. So Peter Bowl, our artistic director, created a digital season really quickly. I was still thinking, oh, we're going to be back for Giselle. It's going to be fine. Well, no. And so we produced 89 films during the 2021 season, and they were seen in all 50 states and 36 countries. It is amazing to me. Who is this person in Wales following PNB? But yes, a really monumental shift. And the budget, we're about a $25 million budget, and we went down to 14 million. Yeah.
Amada, I know that you also had to close your doors. I think you, if I'm right, you opened and then closed again. Am I right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, so we closed, March 13th. I'll never forget it. Yeah, our last day to be open. And so we were closed, let's see, for about 8 months, and then we reopened briefly, and then we had to close after 2 months. So I actually got here for this job 6 months before the pandemic. And my first 4 months were all about focused on finishing the work on the Asian Art Museum. And so then we had 2 weeks of parties and celebrations, and it was a really wonderful, wonderful time because a lot of community members stepped up and donated. So lots of pride. And then once that was done, sort of switched over for a couple of months to say, okay, what does the Seattle Art Museum actually look like when it's functioning? Now I can actually focus to see. And I saw it for 2 months. So it's a very strange thing when people ask me, how do we do it before? Like, I really don't know how we did it before. So we're sort of looking at everything we do with fresh eyes. But we lost all of our earned income, although our percentage is lower. So we lost about 25% of our income. We were losing $500,000 a month we were looking at losing. And so we very quickly did a lot of things. We pivoted to online life, which is so much easier said than done. The entire staff, almost the entire staff is all of a sudden working from home. We're not a tech company. And so we don't all have the same computers. Some people didn't even have cameras on their computers. And you guys did an amazing season of digital dance. It was extraordinary. We weren't quite as poetic, let's say, but we did actually pivot to online programs and lectures and kids things and workshops and all of that very, very quickly. And it was really amazing what the staff was able to do. But it was very, very difficult. And so now we are very slowly ramping back up. We also have about a $25 to $26 million budget, and we're about that again. But it's cost of living is very expensive in Seattle, as you know. And so trying to, treating everybody fairly on your staff and all of that, all those increases that we all want to give to our staffs, we're trying to do the best we can. But that in my mind is one of the biggest challenges, is how do we keep everybody fairly employed in a city like this? But we're happy that COVID is kind of over. I know. So this week I've had 3 staff members who were not able to go to an event we did today because they either have COVID or they were in proximity to someone. So it's still with us.
Michelle, as Amada and Ellen were talking, I realized even though you do present some local and student and faculty artists, you rely a lot on touring. So what happened?
That stopped.
Yes, it did.
So we lost all of our revenue after we closed in that mid-March 2019. We lost all of our revenue the successive year. And then we've just been coming back slowly this year. I think at the beginning of the season, we had about 40% of what our normal ticket sales would be. And now we closed at about 70%. But we have artists coming from all over the world, dropping in, leaving, going to the next place. And so we got really, as you have, Ellen, and I know everybody probably here, really comfortable with antigen testing and figuring that out. But one of our early questions to ourselves was, understanding our role in the arts ecosystem and what we can do to support artists, to support, of course, our staff, to support all of the pieces of this, because when we come back from the pandemic, that needs to be there. And those artists were, I think, hit almost harder than we were. I have to say, I think that because there's no safety net for many of the artists. So it was just really an opportunity for us to really think hard about what we can do. And of course, we had media on screen. We did a lot of digital performances. All of our artists did digital performances. We paid them. They did digital conversations. We went into the negative numbers to do that, but then we received, support from our donors. I think donors have been generous, and that's really, really important now, and some outside support. But thinking about our role within the arts ecosystem was really a takeaway for us.
So Kristen, you talked about people bringing sleeping bags. Clearly that was not happening for the last 2 years. You are a performer as well as an administrator. So and I know you're based in New York, so were you experiencing, I'm sort of asking you to answer 2 hats as the leader of Emerald City Music and as a performing artist, sort of what was going through your mind?
So I guess as a younger organization, and also as a very tiny organization, which back in 2020, we were a staff of 2, including myself. So in terms of the overhead expenses and the worries of the finances, in that aspect, we were less worrisome because it was, we didn't have a whole lot of staff to really worry about. So, and right as all of this was happening, I was performing, I was actually supposed to perform that evening at the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. And I had gotten to Lincoln Center, I was getting ready for my concert. And that was the day when Broadway decided to close and Lincoln Center closed. And I've never seen, in the 27 years that I've been out in New York City, I've ever seen Lincoln Center close down like that. And it was the day that we were supposed to perform. So they were so kind enough to let us still give the performance through the live stream screen without an audience. And I just remember coming back on the subway back home with my fellow colleagues, just really scared, and scared about obviously the virus, but also about we're going to lose all of our work. And I literally had colleagues who had children literally saying to me, I don't know how I'm going to feed my children. How am I going to do this? So I think that immediately sort of pushed my mind into thinking, okay, we need to help the musicians. I mean, we have such a small budget, but what can we do to try to lead in that way with this platform at Emerald City? So the very first thing that we were able to do was create this artist fund. I wrote to every single musician that had performed on our stage for the past 4 or 5 seasons, just to say, hey, give us a 3 to 5 minute video. We're going to do like a campaign on this particular day, and we're going to try to raise money. And we did. And, in our budget, it was a good amount that we were able to raise, and we met the goal of $30,000, which I know is a small amount, but for us, it was a huge accomplishment. And we were able to support a lot of these musicians with the little that we could do. And as somebody who was also very dependent on all of the performances, it was a very scary time. But because of this platform, I think I was really just so grateful that I had a community to be able to communicate with and to really look after, and also just a stage to play on the virtual stage. So in many aspects, wearing many different hats, it was really very meaningful time, actually. It was hard, of course, but it gave me a sense of purpose.
So interesting that you say that. 2 years ago is just 2 years ago, but sort of in pandemic years, it's 500 years ago. So I'm just thinking back to all of us being at home. I mean, now we're out, we're in this place, we have masks and vaccines, but we didn't in April of 2020. And so I was working full time at that point. And so I was talking to a lot of you on the phone about the situations that you were in, the various rescue funds and emergency funds. But I'm as you were talking, Kristen, I was thinking about the many digital portals that I and people I knew were taking advantage of. Like, I could go to the Louvre and peruse their collection. I could also go to SAM, which I did. Michelle and Ellen, you both mentioned digital content going up, and it might have been, I was saying to Kristen before this panel started that Yo-Yo Ma was like playing his cello everywhere. I saw a little video on Instagram while he was getting his vaccination in 2021. He's then, during his 15 minutes where you sit there, he had his cello and he was playing. So the arts, while people lost their jobs and you lost, what was it, $500,000 a month?
We didn't end up, by the way.
Oh, good.
We didn't, but
You
we were
just
looking
worried.
at that. Yeah.
But so while all that was happening, we were dependent on what sort of psychologically and emotionally on what you were scrambling to put out. So I'm wondering, was that an organic thing that everybody just did? Did you all have a group of arts leaders that convened and said, we're going to do this? Yay. I mean, how were you thinking then about what you could do as leaders, both for your organizations, but externally for the communities, the global community, I guess. Michelle?
Well, I think probably all of us were worried, how are we going to stay in touch with our audiences? You know, how are we going to deliver on our mission? Of course, you know, how are we going to support artists? How are we going to support the work that we do? But how are we going to stay in touch with our audiences? So that was one of our major goals in developing digital programming. And I think we all spontaneously erupted at Mimi, at least, that we just did what we needed to do in order to do that. And we knew we wanted to pay artists. I don't know if others, you know, convene. We have our cultural roundtable where we talk about what we're doing together, arts leaders in Seattle. But I don't know that we really talked about creating digital content together. We just all did it because we needed to.
Well, one thing that I think that came out of this time was all of us have gotten to learn about the digital platform, right? I mean, I remember in March when we did this campaign, we didn't know how to sync up the live stream with the cameras and the audio, and there were so many mistakes like throughout the whole evening, but then eventually everyone was getting better and better. And actually we made jokes about saying, oh, like, you know, we need to keep all our digital material at a low level so that people can come back to the live concerts. Things are getting so good now. All the quality is getting so much better. But anyway, so I mean, I think it is a positive outcome of this time because we've learned how to stay connected. Like what Michelle was saying, our concern was how do we engage with our audience, and we've all learned how to do that digitally. So one of the things that we tried to do in around time of December, we were planning actually to have the Miro Quartet doing the entire Beethoven cycle of all string quartets cycle because it was the big celebration of Beethoven's year, which we obviously couldn't do. So we decided to pivot and thought, okay, how can we send a message to the arts community, our whole city, that we are all coming together to try to do something? So we were able to spearhead a digital festival where we engaged with 17 different arts organizations from all different disciplinaries. And we created a 3-day, all-day sort of digital festival, celebrating the different sort of human qualities of Beethoven's rather than just his music, but whether it was that he has some sort of disability he was dealing with, or his vulnerability, or you know, just sort of talking about the different sorts of traits that Beethoven had, and then incorporated them to their art forms. And so we had this festival called This is Beethoven, which was one of the most meaningful outcomes from Emerald City Music.
So widening that out a little bit, Michelle, you talked about wanting to serve both the artists and your audience. I filled out a very long survey for Mimi. I remember it was pretty early on because I am a patron of all these organizations. But Ellen, I'm wondering, just thinking more broadly about moving ahead to do that, it brings up this question of like, why? It wasn't just that you needed to survive as an organization, that you felt this need to put something out there. That content, it seems to me, well, for me, it was critical to have access to art. And it wasn't just that, I mean, it's critical when I'm home and not able to go out, but it's something about what role art does play in our culture. And it's bigger than a diversion. And I felt that really strongly during the pandemic, that it, for me, reminded me, and for others illuminated the role that all the arts, I mean, whether you watch Netflix all the time, an artist wrote a script, and an actor was an artist. So really it did permeate. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see the role of the arts.
Well, you know, I'm so glad you asked that because our work is really about human connection. There's been all these studies done on audiences in all kinds of performing arts experiences, and heartbeats get in sync. There have been studies about empathy and about social connection and social adhesion, and how the arts advance that and ensure that. And so for us, we were thinking, well, how do we continue that some form of connection? And we added all this ancillary content around the filmed dances. We were also very intent on keeping artists working for all those reasons that you're saying. I mean, what will artists do if they can't work? And we have artists on payroll, our 46 professional dancers, and then our orchestra, which is incredible to have. I mean, it's just the most amazing assets to our organization. So we wanted to keep them working. We wanted to keep their healthcare going. That was non-negotiable for us during a pandemic, but it's $1.3 million for our budget every year. So, but what we decided to do was to add this content around the edges so you can hear dancers' voices, which you don't really do. It's a dialogue-free art form for the most part, unless you're standing backstage, you hear all kinds of things. But we had this thing called 5-minute call, and we had interviews with artists, and we were able to talk about the way that women choreographers need to be advanced in ballet. Ballet has been so interesting where women are everywhere and nowhere. They had been, and that's changing. You know, that ballet is predicated on women, and yet artistic directors and choreographers, where have they been? And so we want to have an active role in changing that. So we were able to advance some of those agendas during that time because we were all at home and we could hear dancers talking about who they are and what they care about and who they want to be in the art form and in our organization.
And I've talked to a lot of the dancers in your company, so I know that there's a change in the sense of agency that they feel, yes. Decision-making. Amada, at the Art Museum, even before you came, who you present and how you present has become, has moved much more to the forefront for all of you in what you're doing. But at the museum itself, how you put together an exhibition has completely changed. It's not just some omnipotent curator who says, this is art, correct?
I'm so happy you noticed.
I do know that.
Yes, that's a big topic, actually. Well, let's see. Wow. The pandemic made us we had time all of a sudden to think about things. And there were things that I wanted to do in this position. You know, I inherited this really healthy organization with fantastic staff, best board I've ever worked with. So my job was to sort of just take it to the next level. And I wanted to do certain things. And then pandemic comes and it's about survival. So now we're sort of reemerging and we've had time to really talk about what the museum should be going forward. And so we are changing the way we do things. So we now have a show on water. I'm not supposed to say that it's a show about water, but it is, Our Blue Planet. And it was co-curated by 3 of the museum's curators. And it actually is about water. And it's really taking the voice of the artist and Indigenous artists in particular. And they were the ones who sort of helped us think about this and think through all of these issues. And we also have these exhibition advisory groups, which started before me, but now we're really using them more intensely to sort of advise on the content of exhibitions, label writing, communication, all of that. And so we're sort of pushing that forward and changing in those ways. And it's been really interesting. And also, you know, we're learning a lot and we're having very difficult conversations. And that's actually a really good thing, right? It's a very different moment in history. So, you know, trying to let go of control, that sort of imperial curator, which I'm sure I was way back when, you know, that model is really changing now for the better.
Michelle, I have to go back to the notion of international artists when I talk to you about this, because I've been thinking this is a group that's focused on democracy, but some of the most amazing art is often artists who are working under regimes that are not democratic and they're pushing. And you present a lot of international musicians, dancers, you name it. And Kristen too, you're presenting work by composers who are often pushing against a regime that we might not think about because that was early 20th century Russia. But Eastern Bloc the former Soviet Union, Asia. And so I'm wondering if you have had those kinds of conversations or when you've gone out and seen these groups, if that's something that you're considering when you bring them.
Absolutely. In 2015, I was invited to Ukraine by the State Department to travel across the country to find groups that the State Department would then fund to tour in this country. And the arts are a very important and powerful form of diplomacy. And so in our just being there and talking to so many artists across the country and really understanding the depth of the desire to be part of the West, and then bringing artists here, that is a form of becoming aware of another individual, a way of thinking, a nation, and there's no other real substitute than either going or bringing people from that country or that region of the world. We also supported and have supported Taiwanese artists significantly. And, being in China and being in Shanghai and seeing work develop there versus being in Taiwan and seeing work develop there, it's a very different picture for artists. And we very much support artistic freedom in Taiwan. And that is something that we can continue to support by bringing those artists and supporting their work and introducing them to our communities. And so it's international artists, I think locally too, in addition to grappling with the sustainability and accessibility of the ecosystem, we're really thinking about diversity, equity, social justice, and how historically marginalized communities in our region can be empowered by the arts, and what that role can be to actually create platforms for our communities to express.
I'm going to open it up to questions in just a second, but it's hard for me to have this conversation. I mean, I could talk to you for about 5 hours about this, but I have to, I don't normally even think about the Eurovision Song Contest, but a Ukrainian quartet won the Eurovision Sound Contest. And I got to thinking about Volodymyr Zelensky, who's an actor, who's a performer, who's an artist. Then I started thinking about Václav Havel, who led the revolution in what was Czechoslovakia. So it got me to thinking about what qualities artists bring to the table. Michelle, you were an artist. Amara, you were a curator. Kristen is an artist. I mean, what is it about the arts and the way an artist thinks and sees the world that can empower somebody, that can inspire? I mean, I think of personally, and you guys might not agree, that Zelensky is a profile in courage. I mean, what a brave man. Doing something that he really wasn't trained to do, as far as I can tell. So what does being an artist bring? I mean, you're leading an arts organization. What does being an artist bring to that kind of leadership role?
Well, when you're training as a performing artist, your world is so immersed in yourself because you're so caring of just your own craft, right? So you're trying to just focus on your creativity and your refinement. But when you become a professional performing artist, you realize that you have to take on a much larger responsibility. And to be honest, I think I only recently started to really understand that myself. And it's very hard to, get out of my own head about my own craftsmanship, because it's, we need that discipline and we need that practice. But you realize that when you are on stage and when you are faced and communicating with thousands of people out there who are eager to listen to you and really just hungry for something beautiful and powerful, there is a sense of responsibility that you need to take. Your voice is going to mean a lot, whether that is playing a piece that's written many years ago, or where it's actually that it becomes more about you and not your just craft, but how you present yourself out there, right? So the programs you put out there, what kind of message that you're trying to put out there. So it becomes a much more purposeful, meaningful thing. So I think it's constantly evolving. I think as musicians and actually as presenters, it's also our job to really encourage that to the performers as well and to the artists. If the presenter is not encouraging and not sensible of what kind of voice that they have, then it can be very stuck in their own, performance. But if they realize that they have this sense of responsibility, then it constantly pushes them. And I think it needs to challenge them constantly what is being put out on stage and what kind of message they're being put out. So
Michelle, you're nodding. You were a musician.
Well, I was just going to say that's so interesting. And I'm actually finishing my doctorate at the University of Washington in violin performance. So I'm still a musician, although I'm not performing that much yet. But I thought about this, artists are so collaborative. I think they're also able to see the bigger picture oftentimes and imagine possibilities and hold ambiguities in their minds and then sort of work from these really big ideas to shape them. I also think they're willing to ask hard questions and embrace the idea of this sort of evolving organic path in answering those hard questions. And also I think artists are great at making connections across really wide ranges of topics. And so we've actually started bringing artists. Bill T. Jones is curating a series for us next year. He's a leading American choreographer, and his work is going to be really focusing on disrupting systems that exists, looking at his unique form of aesthetic rigor and his viewpoint of aesthetic rigor, and then also what it means to be a citizen of the world. That's the theme of the work that he's pulling together and the conversations we're having both in the community and on campus. But I think these artists are such incredible thinkers, and the more we can embed artists within our society and our institutions, the better off we'll be.
You're speaking to this personal choir here. I totally agree. I want to open it up to questions. And so there may be some on Zoom, yes, no, but there's Connie over there. Hold up your microphone. Whoever has a question, we need you to ask it into the microphone so our Zoom audience can hear it as well.
So you talked about the changes that you made during COVID. I'm wondering if there are any changes that you feel were positive for like the artistic factor that you want to carry over after hopefully things turn normal again.
I'm going to give that to Ellen because I know that there are changes at the ballet that will stay.
Oh, so many. For one, this question of accessibility for people who don't live here or are no longer able to come to the ballet, to have that program delivered to their home. And then for maybe some of those folks that have this definition of what is ballet, who is it for, who is it by, the work that we're doing there to really evolve and sort of open up that aperture of classical ballet. I think that kind of messaging is really important, and it's done both in our performances at McCaw Hall, but also on those digital programs. And I think the way that Peter said, okay, stop everything in 2021. I'm going to set that season aside, and we're going to have Jessica Lang and Crystal Pite and Donald Byrd and all these other choreographers who I hadn't quite planned on for next season, but we need them in this season, and we're gonna roll here. And then we've just kept up that diverse representation of choreographic voices, and that is not going away. And our company too is now 44% BIPOC, and that is an important and profoundly beautiful change in ballet that is just going to keep going.
Amada, are there changes at the museum that will stay in place?
Yeah, but I really don't want to give any kudos to COVID for this. So, and I was actually, but you set this up for me beautifully, Ellen, which is that, you know, the racial reckoning that we all have been through, that to me is more important, much more impactful. You know, the Seattle Art Museum has a really good legacy and track record of doing equity work. And I feel like it just kind of fast tracked everything, right? So the things that we wanted to do and we thought we needed more time to do, like, no, there are no more excuses. You know, this is what we're doing. And so we've actually been, you know, looking at every aspect of the museum and how we can instill racial equity, which was already in our strategic plan, but how can we actually do it more intently? You know, the collections we are now buying, I think, majority work by BIPOC artists, and that started a year ago. The exhibitions that we're doing, the leadership and the board, much more diverse. The museum is run by 5 women of color, which is shocking in a major art museum. I'm the only Latina museum director in the country of a big museum. I mean, so we're just fast tracking this. And I think that is what we all need to think about, because I really want to stop talking about COVID, right? Let's talk about other more important things.
They were simultaneous.
I would add to that, that I think, you know, we have been working on creating a roadmap of what we're not going back to. So, you know, this idea of going back to businesses as normal, we're not ever going to go back there. And it's not just because of the pandemics, because of what we know to be true and how we really need to think about, you know, of course, who's running our organizations, how many, you know, artists of color we're presenting, the diversity of the artists we represent, who's on our staffs, our boards, but also we need to think about how we're generating our revenue. What are the relationships that we're developing in our community? What are the communities that we're reaching out to and aligning our work with? What is the shared investment that we share with these communities in that work, and how are we making our work accessible and relevant, and continuing to sustain the you know, you know, we talk about excellence. It's the high level of the work that we do in this context, and that's really necessary.
And I'll add to it as a performing musician, which I think had a huge impact on me. You know, when you're a performer, you know, you go from city to city and you're used to just doing these performances. And when the 2 years of nothing happened and you were just playing over the screen, it was a real time of reflection. And I can say this on behalf of probably so many, a majority of performing musicians. So my very first performance out of the pandemic, when I went on that stage, I think I almost like fainted after I played, because I've never played like pouring my heart out like that, because I've learned to realize how much we rely on the audience as much as the audience relies on the performer. So that aspect, I don't think any performing musician would ever take for granted ever again. I really think that musicians have been playing at a much higher level since the pandemic, because I think everyone's been just really understanding how valuable and important the audience is, just as the musicians on the stage. So.
Okay, and then there's Francis, one behind you. Okay.
Hi, is this on? Yes, okay. I have to ask, when I'm in front of 4 really powerful women, on your experience with breaking the system, because I am very focused on breaking the system in a very traditional consulting firm. And I expect that the arts is another area where there are a lot of systems to break. And so I'm interested in your experience with breaking the system, and I'm defining the system as like the way things have always run, the status quo, and any advice you have for all of us out in the workforce trying to do the same?
Get some armor. Get some armor. Yeah, I don't consider myself a breaker of the system. I like to think of myself as a reformer. I've always worked from within mainstream institutions. That's just what I prefer. But I think you have to you have to think about your own personal values um, and um, and be really fearless, but also understand what the consequences might be. And then think about how far you want to take them. Everyone's, life is different, right? And so the stakes are very different for everybody. Yeah.
Michelle, are you a system breaker?
I would say that I use the system sometimes, quite honestly, to really work through it, to benchmark against male colleagues in the field, to continue to do my research and to be very, very vocal about that research. And I know that I'm at a university where there's a lot of research and benchmarking being done, and they listen to that. But I can't say enough how important that has been. Also, really having a mentor or two or three that you engage early on in your career. They are invaluable, and then you can do it for somebody else. But that's one of the most valuable things I learned.
Ellen, are you a system breaker?
I totally am.
I know.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I'm not a dancer. I never was a dancer. I took disco tap at the community center, and I loved that class. It was 1979. Amazing neglected art form. But here's the thing. I came to ballet through a real love for supporting artists and also for developing audiences for arts organizations. I think that for me, it was such a worthwhile way to spend my career time. And in ballet, there's this devotion to tradition and to aesthetic, as though aesthetic is not changeable or mutable. And so in the nicest possible way, I was so often told to stay in my lane because I'm not a ballet dancer, in the nicest possible way. But the problem is ballet has really big problems in terms of keeping people out. It's an art form that is very difficult. You have to have the right vessel for it. It's a real upside down funnel. And I have found, and this is in the last many years, and I'm fortunate at PNB to have an artistic director, and we really faced the same way on the evolution of the art form. And he's the one who comes out of a classical ballet tradition. He has the ability to make the changes that are so incredibly important to me. But he can do that because of who he hires to be a faculty member in our school or a dancer in our company. And we are very aligned in that work. But the way to break the system I'm in, the way to break it is through an absolutely dedicated commitment to our inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility work, and to never take my foot off the gas, and to articulate my value around that work at every opportunity. It is the most consequential work I do. This ballet has this ballet field has a lot to answer for in terms of hundreds of years of a status quo, and the evolution is exciting and necessary, and honestly, the most important work I do. So happy to break that system.
But she's also butted heads with bureaucrats and won. So I just say that about her. She's tough in a sweet and relentlessly cheerful way. They're all tough. You're right. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kristen?
Well, yes, because I feel like our organization is built on like being the rebel in every possible way. We're all about, let's break the traditions and let's break the ideas. What you experience on the outside is that, but also from the inside, we're really trying to break that system of, okay, this tradition of why classical music has been built in this system of really catering to certain types of people, programming certain types of music, the divisiveness, why has this happened? It doesn't make any sense. It's not enjoyable. And personally, I really feel like that is the reason why we have this question all the time. Why is it not relevant to everybody? So that's literally the foundation of this organization. So yes, we are all about it. We're sort of the rebels, I think, in many, many, many aspects. But to answer your question, I hope this doesn't sound too controversial, but I feel like being part of the system is sort of the lazy way out. I really think that's what it is. I catch myself doing this all the time when I sort of fall into the default of what I know. It's always following and going by what's already the tradition or the system. So it's constant battle of thinking like, wait, but is this really what we're trying to do? So it takes so much more diligence and effort and research and, finding the right mentors, like Michelle was saying, and just really knowing more, having more knowledge. And so I feel like it should be all about breaking the system, as long as there's that commitment and the vision and the mission to really establish that you are going to make that change. So it's hard, but it's important.
And yet you persist.
Okay. I'm worried about the children. We've had a situation where kids were not allowed to go to school. They couldn't go to school. We've had open, close, masks, no masks. And as a former music teacher in Seattle schools, whose daughter is now a music teacher in another school district, these children have really lost a lot over the last 2 years. And I look to the arts to help bring them back. And I'm wondering how we're going to get the resources with our organizations who've been active with youth programs and even high school programs, how we're going to be able to pull that together and work with these kids who I think will be troubled kids if we don't get them back to where they need to be.
Amada, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making a really good point, right? We all have to, we're sort of restoring ourselves as human beings and as, community members. We were not able, clearly, to do all the kids programs in person that we did so well. There were so many of them. I couldn't honestly keep track. There were so many, which was really wonderful. So we did actually pivot to online programs, and we found that they were very popular because of the phenomenon that you're describing, is that parents were at home with their kids going nuts and not knowing what to do with them all day. And so we did actually have very popular programs, and those are continuing. However, we are now finally starting to think about having programs in person, whether they're at the schools or community centers or back at the museum, probably not until the fall because of this up and down with COVID numbers and all of that. So we are certainly hoping to get back to that.
Michelle, does Mini offer programs for the youth?
Absolutely. We had a program in the schools before the pandemic, and we haven't been able to get back in the schools since that time. So that is a challenge. We do have digital content that we push and share with the schools. We have a matinee program that we're excited to get started again next year, where we bus in students for a number of matinee programs during the year. But the in-school has been harder because of the pandemic. And so we just haven't been able to get in, but that is something we plan to continue again.
Are kids back at P&B in school?
In our P&B school or in community education, or both?
Both.
Both. Yeah.
We have many programs as well.
Yeah. Louise, I'm so with you on that. I was so deeply worried when everything was shut down. I was worried about the mental health of those kids. There are a lot of little kids and little boys in particular for whom their ballet class is where they can be themselves. If they're the only boy in their whole school who's studying ballet, what does that mean for them to lose that time and that community in the studio? We've seen a huge impact on that continuity of training. I was at a performance for our school kids recently. I'm like, what happened to the partnering? Oh, COVID happened to the partnering. There's this piece that's been missing. Again, we're getting back to that question of proximity. And so, yeah, it is a big concern of ours. We are back in the schools. We have a program called Dance Chance. We have 20 partner schools in the Seattle Public Schools system, where we bring kids out of their classroom during the day to study ballet here at PMB. And then in our community education programs, we go into the schools, and that is not so much ballet, but it is about curriculum-based moving to music and how to amplify curriculum through dance. And our Dance Chance manager during the pandemic was driving around to all those kids' homes with their ballet shoes and their elastic and their leotards. And do you have Zoom? Can you do this? Do you want to continue? So it's all those individual conversations, but gosh, yeah, such a worry. And we're just trying to rebuild. We're not there yet.
Jane?
So I'm Jane Repentic. I'm very fortunate to be the Chief Operating Officer of the Opera, as well as an officer at the Center for Women and Democracy, and so pleased to have this conversation with all of you today. My position also allows me to have text messaging from CFOs of the arts organizations and who are tuning in on Zoom. And I do have and am fielding a question from one of our CFOs in the arts. And the question is, hearkening maybe back to the last topic of how do we get our boards to come along that are male dominated and maybe a concentration of wealth in men who maybe don't see the merit of, I can see Michelle and I can see Kristen just sort of waiting for this question. How do we bring them along, especially since they have, in some instances, 50 and 60 and 70 years of living on this earth in a paradigm that they're accustomed to, and with the world changing, how do we bring them along?
I'm sorry, can you clarify that question? How do you bring them along, in what way?
How do you bring them along in terms of understanding that diversity in programming and reaching out to the community and not just presenting the classics is a way to engage the community? How do we bring them into more than just, I'm going to speak from opera. How do we bring them more in just the 10 best hits from the last 300 years as a way to bring them along? How do we bring them into Blue and Yardbird and, Revolution of Steve Jobs as being relevant to today?
Michelle?
How long are their terms? I'm serious.
That's an excellent question.
Yeah. Honestly, at the museum, we don't really have that problem, to tell you the truth. And it's definitely not gendered, by the way. So if I encounter anything like that, it's usually a generational issue when people grow up with certain expectations, or they've, certain cultural expectations of what good art is and what is important art, and what is valid art, let's say. But I feel honestly very fortunate that I don't really have that issue. But I think maybe it's because the museum has always had a very strong tradition of showing contemporary art, that maybe people are used to us doing things that very few people understand. So it's fine, right? It's just part of what we do because we have a balanced program when we also do things like the Giacometti show that's opening in July. And, we showed Monet last summer. So I think in our case, it's just not as much of an issue.
And I would follow up, not to be flippant, but we were very clear about our intentions around equity and social equity across all of our programming, particularly right after the pandemic started. And we lost some board members, some white male board members, and it was fine. And I do think that there are a lot of powerful men and women out there who want to support a diverse artistic community. And we need to be open to embracing them and open to, some transition on our boards, because that may need to happen.
Okay. First of all, I think that alignment, like no daylight between the artistic and executive director in terms of the commitment to say, yes, Swan Lake is beautiful. This art form was never meant to be static. It's not in amber. It is going to change. Swan Lake was a new work at one point. Come on now. We don't need to hold these things as sacred. They are beautiful. I mean, with Swan Lake, the steps are great. The music is great, but why do the dancers' legs all have to match? That's not normal. That doesn't need to be that way. And so it is about keeping the evolution in the conversation. That's my feeling, Jane. And then really being in alignment between the business side and the artistic side.
I mean, it sounds like we're all agreeing that the constant need for evolving is the answer. I mean, the fact that we could be here to have these conversations itself means that we've evolved over and we're going through some sort of change, which is so exciting. You know, as someone who is often very immersed in very traditional classical music, yeah, sometimes it's a little frustrating, and I can relate to the question in a lot of ways, but on the flip side, just to complain about it and to be frustrated with that doesn't really do anything. So the fact that we focus on how we can continue to evolve and live through the history and make the changes, I think is really, that focus is going to make all of the difference. Yeah.
I think we're going to take one more question.
Is this, yeah. My name is Bernie Dognall, and I serve on several hospital boards. And so while we'll need to learn to live with COVID, I think the current pandemic that's going to continue to get worse, especially with the youth